All right, hope you guys are ready to dive into this emotional roller coaster. We're talking about Inside Out 2. And yes, that pun was intended. But anyways, yes, we're here to talk about Inside Out 2. The movie just came out. I checked it out, and I've made it no secret in the past that I think Disney is not in the best spots now, but I think most people realize that by now. But during this Disney slump, I feel like Pixar has been the best out of all of them, even though they're kind of going through a slump too. Yeah, they've had a couple of missteps, but I do think some of their more recent offerings like Turning Red, Elemental, Luca, Soul, they all had really good moments, and I think overall the films were good. They just also felt like they were missing something, like they almost reached Pixar's great level of storytelling and quality, but just something was holding them back in each one. And I was really hoping that Inside Out 2 would be the movie to kind of break that slump, you know? But it kind of had the card stacked against it, considering Toy Story sequels aside, except for you. Usually Pixar's sequels tended to be a lot weaker than their predecessors, and I was really hoping Inside Out 2 wouldn't join that club. I was really hoping, because I love the first movie so much, that I was like, please be in the ballpark as good. You don't have to be as good, just as long as you're close. I don't want this to be a major step down, just be close to as good and I'll be happy, please. But I kept an open mind, walked into that theater and saw the film, and I'm happy to say, I think my wish was granted. Y'all, I loved this movie. I loved Inside Out 2 so much. It did pretty much everything I wanted this film to do. It took the idea that the first movie did and ran with it in a direction that made sense for all the characters. It made sense for the major overarching story of Riley. It was well thought out. It was well executed. I do have a couple of gripes with it, but nothing so bad like it spoils the whole movie or says that it's terrible. So if you're asking me, do I think it's as good or better than the first movie? I would say I think there's elements that the film does better than the first one, but the film as a whole does not feel quite as cohesive as the first one. So I'd still think the first one is better, but Inside Out 2 is not far behind, you guys. It's right there. It can stand next to Inside Out on its own and still be called a great movie, I think. And let's just throw some good at the movie, some of the great stuff that I thought they did. Well, first of all, for those guys who don't know, we do have a bit of a casting change from the first movie. Fear is no longer being voiced by Bill Hader, it's now Tony Hale. And Disgust is no longer voiced by Mindy Kaling, but now Liza Lapira. And I will say this, I think both of them do a tremendous job taking over these roles. Tony Hale doesn't sound like Bill Hader, but he feels like Fear. So the whole movie, I was like, yeah, you don't sound like Fear, but you act like him enough, I can totally buy this, and that's totally fine. And for Disgust, Liza Lapira. I didn't even realize that this wasn't Mindy Kaling. The whole movie, she sounded like and acted like Disgust from the first movie. I have no notes there. Tremendous job. Tremendous job. And of course, the returning cast, Amy Poehler, Lewis Black, Phyllis Smith, they were all fantastic. And for the newcomers, Maya Hawke was fantastic as Anxiety. Her voice was perfect to play this character. And then, I'm not even going to try to say this name, who played Ennui. She did a great job. But out of all the new emotions, Embarrassment was absolutely my favorite. Especially because this guy barely says anything. And I think you can kind of tell that from the trailer, so that's not really a spoiler. But they do so well with his animation. You always know what he's thinking and feeling. And I love mute characters in animation. I love it so much. My only nitpick might be Envy. Envy is not a bad character by any means. She's totally fine. She just kind of feels a little more pointless than everybody else. Everybody else feels like they serve more of a purpose, all the new emotions. She kind of feels like she's there only to be a sounding board for Anxiety because Ennui and Embarrassment won't really talk back to her. Because she ends up just being a yes man for Anxiety the whole film. And I don't think that's bad, and she's not bad, she's not annoying to have around. But I kind of wish she served more of a purpose, you know? But like I said, that is a nitpick. They're all fantastic, and I loved having all four of them around. but just like the first movie, you can tell that they did a lot of research when it comes to how your brain works, how your emotions work, especially during the years of puberty, like how your emotions and hormones shift and change. Oh, y'all, the main story was just so freaking good. And as someone who's dealt with a lot of similar issues, this was very cathartic and therapeutic to see on screen. Oh my gosh. They handled so much of this so well, and I feel like this could be really healing for a lot of people. Another positive was I liked the fact that we saw more of disgust, fear, and anger together interacting with joy, since we didn't get a lot of that in the first movie, since it kind of became a sadness and joy movie primarily. I was kind of sad we didn't get to see as much of sadness because of that, but I still think they did some pretty good stuff with her character and her role. But it kind of made me laugh when I saw this. I'm like, oh, so anger, fear, and disgust had a Toph moment where they're like, now it's time for my life-changing trip with Zuko. And I really appreciate that throughout the film, Riley is presented with a whole bunch of options that very few of them are like black and white, right and wrong. A lot of the choices are very much in gray areas. There's not like oh, if you do this, this is obviously a bad thing, and if you do that, that's obviously a good thing. It's very much, well, there's pros and cons to both. How do we pick? And that's tricky. I like not having that clear black and white lines in this movie, so it leads to some ambiguity, which leads the emotions to some ambiguity, and that made the film far more interesting and far more realistic to how people actually think and feel, especially because most of the decisions we have to make, there's not really a right or wrong answer. There's just kind of two different shades of gray. Which one do we do? It's kind of hard to pick. I really appreciated that. Now, my main critique with this one is I feel like the story of the emotions away from headquarters, number one, was already done in the first movie, and I think it was done better there. Now, don't get me wrong, this story beat was not done poorly at all, but I couldn't shake the feeling it's been done before, especially when they went through a few of the same areas, and even Joy's like, oh, let me show you, this is here and that's there. For a second, I was like, oh, I kind of wish y'all saw more places than just places you've already been to, but luckily we did. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely some, and overall, it felt more disjointed to the main story than what they did in the first movie. I felt like with Joy and Sadness's expedition, they interacted more with Riley. There was more things going on, like stuff happening with Riley that impacted their journey. Whereas here, it kind of felt like every time we went to the emotions trying to get back to headquarters, it kind of just felt more fillery. Good filler, but kind of fillery. Where I was getting really invested with Riley and her story, and I'm like, oh, what's happening here? What's happening here? Oh, okay, we gotta stop to go through this for a little bit. Okay. It's still good, and I'm happy to see it, but I want to go back to the Riley story. But hey, if that's the worst thing I can say about this movie is that this plot point worked and was done well, I just wish it was done better. Shoot, that should be a compliment in and of itself. It might be a bit early to tell because I've only seen the movie once, and I need some time with it to fully understand how I feel about it. But for right now, I think it may be sitting at my favorite non-Toy Story sequel that Pixar's ever done. And in my opinion, the best film that Pixar's put out since Coco. I know Pixar is about to make a slew of sequels, and if they make them this good, shoot, sign me up. Give me more sequels like this if they're gonna be this good and this respectful to their original films. I'm game. But that's just one man's opinion, so let me know down in the comments. Did you guys agree with me? Did you disagree with me? Let me know, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!